Thank you, Senator Isakson.
Thank you, Senator Corker, and thank you for your outstanding opening remarks. I think you cast the hearing exactly in the place it should be. Mr. Tillerson, thank you for accepting this challenge. Thank you for accepting the challenge of sitting before us for a couple of hours and answering a lot of tough questions in a great way. Thank you also for bringing United States Senator Sam Nunn to introduce you. That goes a long way with me, and I think with a lot of people here. Sam served for 24 years in the United States Senate. He chaired the Armed Services Committee, and he and Dick Lugar did the Nunn-Lugar Initiative, which has reduced the exposure of the world to nuclear fissionable material to be used by terrorists around the world, and was a chief advisor to me and a number of other members of the committee on the New START Treaty, and did a great job of helping us to understand what Russian capabilities were and how important it was for us to maintain a strong role on that. So I appreciate you having Sam here. He's a great testimony to you as an individual. You mentioned a number of things, and I'm going to take them in order real quickly and try and ask specific questions. With regard to American leadership being renewed and reasserted, because to lead in the world, we have to renew our leadership, have to reassert our leadership. You've said that. Probably one of the most interesting places in the world right now where we basically are out of the picture is the Middle East with regard to Aleppo or with regard to Syria. Turkey and Iran and Russia are sitting at the table as they divide up what's left of Syria and its assets and what's going to happen in the future. And we're sitting outside. If, as the nominee for being the chief negotiating diplomat for the United States of America, what would you recommend we do to get a seat at that table, and what form of renewed leadership should we exercise to have that leadership respected?
Well, if confirmed, Senator, I think the first step we have to take is to re-engage with our traditional allies and friends in the area and reaffirm that we are back. We are back with our leadership, and we're back with a plan of how to affect where events in Syria go from here. We can't do anything about where we are today. I think you described the situation accurately. Russia, Syria, Turkey, and Iran are dictating the terms of how things are going to play out in Syria today, absent our participation. So I think it's a re-engagement with our traditional allies, sharing with them where we believe we have to now go in Syria. We have to re-engage with President Erdogan in Turkey. This is a long-standing NATO ally that, in the absence of American leadership, he got pretty nervous about his situation, and he turned to who was next available. And he turned to an ally in Russia that is not a sustainable ally. And it's making clear to him that is not a sustainable alliance. Your sustainable alliance is with the United States of America. So the first step is that re-engagement and reinforce what have been longstanding commitments by the United States to stability and security in this part of the world. And that includes reestablishing a clear statement of how important Israel is to us and our national security and the role they play in this region of the world for our benefit as well. After that, then we will have a plan that will be developed in concert with the National Security Council as to how we accomplish two things. One, we've got to protect the innocent people on the ground in Syria. People are fleeing areas. How do we secure their protection so they are no longer indiscriminately bombed, put under threat? And if that can happen, then perhaps there can be a stabilization of the outflow of people who are leaving because there is not a safe place to go. Second step then, as I indicated, is defeat ISIS. We've had two competing priorities in Syria under this administration. Bashar al-Assad must go, and the defeat of ISIS. And the truth of the matter is, carrying both of those out simultaneously is extremely difficult because at times they conflict with one another. The clear priority is to defeat ISIS. We defeat ISIS, we at least create some level of stability in Syria, which then lets us deal with the next priority of what is going to be the exit of Bashar Assad. But importantly, before we decide that is in fact what needs to happen, we have to answer the question, what comes next? What is going to be the governance structure in Syria, and can we have any influence over that or not? So there are a number of steps in a long road of regaining stability in Syria, defeating one of the greatest threats to us, which is ISIS, and then determining what is the fate and future of the Syrian people and Syria as a nation. It's going to take many steps, but it isn't going to start until we get re-engaged in that region.
I'll make a statement. You don't have to concur with it or not, but I think it's implicit that we wouldn't be where we are today had two things, and we not failed to do two things. One, we failed to enforce the red line when we drew it. Number one was Syria. And I think that's an important thing to understand because we didn't renew and assert our leadership in that position. And secondly, we never changed our ISIL policy from containment to destruction, and because containment allowed them to continue to operate in that area, it made it impossible to get to a position we are today. Would you have any comment on that?
I would agree with both of those reflections.
Are you familiar with the term the Dutch disease?
I am.
I think that's what Senator Kane was referring to. My son wrote his master's thesis at Tulane in the early 1990s on the Dutch disease, so that's the only reason I know anything about it. But it points out the second thing about the State Department that's so important. The Dutch disease is what the Middle East suffers from. They have an infinite source of, well, not infinite, but for all practical purposes, infinite source of wealth in terms of oil and petroleum. They decided not to invest that money in their people and in infrastructure, and instead kind of bought their people off with the money they had and had kingdoms and palaces where they lived. And now we're suffering today because they have no medicine, they have no educational system, they have no infrastructure. USAID, Millennium Challenge Corporation, those entities within the State Department which are would be under your responsibility, are where we take our soft power to develop countries and friends at the same time. The Peace Corps being another example of that. I am a huge supporter of those institutions and have seen those dollars, those soft dollars, invested in helping to build the infrastructure of human life within these countries that don't have it, a tremendous asset for us in the future. Do you share that belief?
I do, Senator, and as I think I commented earlier, USAID has one set of criteria by which the aid is provided.
Your duty is clear. You must protect Rex Tillerson. The people do not want Wyoming as Secretary of State. Protect Rex Tillerson and honor the earth.
The use of AID is multifaceted in terms of both disaster relief and development. One of the most successful programs I've seen is the Millennial Challenge Corporation because it has ownership on part of the country. They have to request the grant. They have to take ownership of the implementation. And it is, in many ways, an advancement of their institutional capacity to actually get something done. That's where you would hope we can put all of these countries on a pathway where they can begin to take responsibility and develop the infrastructure and the educational systems and the need to meet the needs of their people. It is a different journey for each of these countries, and the use of the foreign assistance, to the extent we can make USAID development programs more like Millennial Challenge, recognizing different criteria, but it goes to the responsibility of the recipient government and putting some level of criteria where we are promoting the development of their institutional capacity to begin to look back to their people and address their needs. They're powerful tools, and they're powerful because, as I said earlier, they really project the best of American compassion.
I appreciate your answer because a lot of people have questioned whether or not we ought to have a corporate executive from the private sector be Secretary of State. Soft power, which all of us prefer to hard power if we can use it, depends on the concept of joint venture and the investment of capital and natural resources to bring about the best for people where those resources are. Your knowledge of that joint venture process is going to be invaluable with the State Department as we go through Africa and other developing countries to use Millennium Challenge to bring about a reduction in corruption, an increase in friends, and hopefully better votes in the UN when we need them the most.
It is, I think we certainly should use that as a way to build those connections with developing countries around the world and countries that hopefully are going to be on the rise and can be important models to others to demonstrate it is possible to lift yourself out of this condition.
One last quick question, and it's not a catch-22, but I'm a big supporter of trade. I think trade is important. It's a weapon that we have to use, a soft power weapon to have friends and help the United States of America. China, the whole issue of TPP has been an issue. I know the President was questionable on TPP, but not on trade itself. And do you think trade is an important component in intergovernmental relationships between countries and has a role to the State Department?
Having strong economic alliances where there's a certain, I hate to use the word interdependency because some people find that a threatening term, but having those important connections allows us to have these economic ties where we want to maintain good relations with one another. They also provide an enormous opportunity for us to know one another as people. This is just people going about their daily lives, doing their jobs, and having connections with others in other countries that are doing the same. It allows us to project America's values into those countries we're trading with. We have a presence in those countries bringing American standards of conduct, honest dealings, ethical behavior, a structure around honoring our deals. The deal's a deal, we honor it. So economic trade is critical to the success of our foreign policy.
Well, thank you very much for your willingness to serve, and thanks to your wife and family for their willingness to help you, support you in that service. Thank you.